cycle update.
I gotta be honest, I had planned to do a two-part for my expose, and unfortunately the rabbit hole goes fairly deep to the point that it's not going to be a two-parter, and I apologize for that, but there's a lot to digest, and I want to make sure I cover all of it to the best of my ability. See, all the data is intertwined together. It's kind of this ball of yarn of interconnected play. And it goes back a long ways. And there's a lot of people that have come and gone that are part and parcel to what's going on. To the point I thought it makes better sense to do additional episodes. So my weekend special will continue, but unfortunately there will not be more than one episode per day. So I'm going to do parte dos today. Parte dos focuses on Vy Pham. There will be mentions about Saitama. There will be mentions about Robo, because there's intersection that some of it was known, some of it was not. And in order to understand it, you kind of have to talk about it. But because there's so much of it, you have to break it apart. Let me clarify that as far as Vy Pham goes, what I can see is they're largely charging Vy Pham with financial crimes, specifically civil. There are civil cases. There is the criminal case, but the civil seems to be heavier on V versus criminal. It seems like they're really going after, with the techniques used and some of the things that the SEC believed were happening. It seems like that's bigger. Their beef on VY, is they treated Saitama, Inu at the time, as a security. And the reason that, as I dug in, doing multiple part episodes made sense is we can benefit from some of the things talked about here to help explain some of the SEC's enforcement actions, because now we have a document that at least tells us what their driver is and was, things where Gary Gensler goes up and just says it's in the law and doesn't really specify in front of Congress, which should get him locked up. But I digress. So I'm just letting you know, parte dos talks simply about Vy Pham. There will be mentions of the other projects because there's intersection. But right now, I've got to focus in on Vy Pham. Next weekend, and I'm sorry, but next weekend, I will be talking about the rest of the clown show that is. So, case was filed again, District of Massachusetts. Civil case. This was filed literally days ago. So this was October 9th. This is filed case 124 CV 12588 from the SEC against Vy Pham. And the reason I wanted to target this one specifically is because Vy Pham's involvement was never really put on the surface the way it is in this document. And I think it helps to explain the unreasonable run-ups we saw in Q2 of 2021 for those that were in or around the project. Like, I saw people talking about it that I didn't even know had any sort of intersection. This is around like Para token, Para Inu, Dior token striking. He talked about it on the show that everybody was seeing it. Some of them had been in it. Some of them were not in it, but it got certainly mainstream attention, not TV mainstream, but mainstream in the sense of cryptocurrency. The vast majority of people in cryptocurrency were aware of Saitama. They didn't know what to think about it. You know, just like SafeMoon, same thing. It's a name. It became a household name. I have people in the Discord that they knew about it. They didn't get into it, but they were aware of it. And they're interested in the stories that I told about it from my personal experience being an investor as I was. So for V, for you don't know, V is the one who created the initial Saitama Inu contract. Spring of 2021 is the statement. From the moment it was launched, I'm talking the initial contract and the initial offering, the SEC considered it a security straight up the jump. And I'll be talking about what their thought process was about this. But remember the claims, anybody who was in it or seeing it, they were talking about, generational wealth, passive income through the reflections, and financial literacy through their Saitama EDU, and you're going to be, this is a worldwide thing. We're going to take over the world and redefine finance, all these terms that they threw out. But under the hood, there was manipulation of the price, aka wash trading, that caught people's eye to help explain some of the runs. The reason for the wash trading was stated in the document, and I found it fascinating, and I think it's good for us all to hear and learn about what was being alleged was going on as part of this process. Follow me down this golden brick road. What they said was that up front, V was involved in some of the initial pumping that was happening with the token. When the transfer happened to the new team, some of the questions that were asked was, well, why did they leave? What happened? This is when we didn't know who it was. It was stated as an unknown or anonymous person, just like with what happened with other projects where they spin up a contract and then they say, all right, I'm handing it over. I don't want to do it anymore. You guys are off on your own or something else. It was benign. Turns out it was not benign. Turns out that V was involved up front to help pump it and get it to a point of success prior to her departure. At the time of the departure, so now we're somewhere, I'm going to say probably about maybe it had to be like June, maybe July, somewhere around there. Somewhere in this early process, in the summertime, she leads the process. Now it's, cult leader and Max Hernandez, Nam. I forget who all was there up front, but there's a core team of like 4 or 5 people at the time. Pham launches the Robo Inu token, and Robo Inu, it's still out there actually. Robo Inu was presenting to do the same thing, financial, independence, and you could do all this stuff and everything else. I'm not going to go into too much focus into the Robo Inu side for the purposes of this episode. It's too much to do, but there's a name that came surfaced as part of the Robo Inu launch, and that's GotBit Consulting. GotBit Consulting, for those that aren't familiar, is a company that they were actually in the news a while back, and they admitted what they do is they help drive artificial volume, which does what? It causes you to FOMO. You see green candles, you buy in. You see red candles, you sell. You're not supposed to do it that way, but that's how people do it. So they drive artificial volume. It's not just buys necessarily. It could be either way. They're doing it to show the illusion of activity and increasing activity. So what they'll do is they'll start, a little small, 10,000s, 50,000, 100,000. They'll ramp up slowly to show the illusion that the token is growing. And then it causes you to FOMO. You may not be aware that a lot of these different services, like a CoinMarketCap, like a TradingView, like a CoinDesk, etc., that show graphs. In a past episode, I talked about the fact that notice all of these graphs start on the 1-day chart, every last one of them. Do you know why? Because the 1-day chart has the greatest volatility, and it does not let you properly predict where the thing's going to go next. It just shows you what's happening today. That's a FOMO reactive strategy. They're doing it because they want you to see that there's a green candle and it shows deep, 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 and you want to buy in right then just so you can become exit liquidity. So every time I do a podcast episode every Tuesday at cryptotalk.fm, you hear me say, we're going to zoom out to the month chart. I do that because I want to calm the volatility down. I want to see a trend over time. I want to see a direction that I'm confident in, which is why I've been so successful in predicting where something's going to go, because I knew that the 1 day was misleading. This artificial volume is why, because I know that there's these what's referred to as market makers, but they're not really market makers because it's artificial. It's often not real people. I'll follow that later. So GotBit was hired to support Robo Inu's pumps. GotBit would also be hired to support Saitama's pumps. V is right at the center of both of these. For Robo Inu, that spanned all of 2022, part of 2023, inflating and promoting and hyping Robo. Now, I would argue Robo did not benefit anywhere near like Saitama did. And the reason is the intriguing part, which I'll get to later, that the artificial didn't really do very much for Robo Inu like she might have thought that it should. The SEC treated Robo Inu as a security, just like it treated Saitama as a security. Fresh out the gate, we say this is a security. Okay, we continue on. When Saitama was first spun up, Pham was considered one of the leaders, one of the heads of the project, in addition to, cult leader Russ, Max Hernandez, Max Equation, Manny the Hitman, Manpreet Kohli, and then Nam Tran. as well as a person that the case refers to as Individual One. Individual One on social media was tagged as Saitama CMO. For those that didn't follow it, Saitama CMO is a person named Aaron Mansour. Aaron Mansour, if I recall, left the project very early on. He wasn't part of the failed team. He had left early on, as I recall. This is my vague memory. But I found it interesting they referred to him not by name, which would imply that he was not directly charged, simply that he is basically not a co-conspirator, but an unindicted co-conspirator in this process. So Aaron Mansour was part of that team. And the fact that they're referring to as Saitama CMO, that's called out. It's got to be either he is cooperative or he was the one that helped expose what was going on, maybe, or was he an insider? I continue on. There's an Individual Two. It's hard to track this person down simply to say that they were out of Australia. They appear to be an unindicted co-conspirator. They appear to have been introduced to Max Equation during the time that they're building out the Saga mask by Vy Pham. So whoever that person is familiar with Max Equation in some way. I tried to trace it to one of the different influencers that were involved at the time, like Steve. He's not, because he was in Europe. It's none of the ones that I could find. So this tells me that this may be related to some developer somewhere. There's a video that Crypto Journey Rodney did where he was showing chats he did with Steve Rocket Crypto after Steve Rocket Crypto left the project, where Steve was talking about his finding that Saga Mask was not owned by Saitama. Instead, it was owned by somebody else that was associated with Max Hernandez, Max Equation, which told me it's possible whoever this person was in Australia is the one that owned the code for Saga Mask as the reason why they could never get it to work, because they were still having to work with that person and Max Equation wasn't really doing anything. This is all theoretical because all we have is Rodney's chats with Steve Rocket Crypto. Steve Rocket Crypto may know more, and perhaps he was interviewed for, the case. But from what I recalled, when Saga Mask first launched, it was so horrifically buggy, and their inability to get anything solved, the whole DDoS attack, nothing made any sense in what was going on. And I speculated something might be wrong in where the code itself, and there could be a backdoor somewhere because of the security issues I saw. Steve Rocket Crypto speculated that there might be a backdoor that allowed whoever that person was to take back over control of the wallet. So now the theory is that Saga Mask itself, the very developed tool that was leading this whole charge of FOMO pump, was manipulated from the very beginning. That because it was owned by somebody else, driven by V essentially outsourcing it, basically it trapped them. It put them in a situation where they couldn't get out of it. We continue. In the case document, there's a section that says, quote, Congress defined security broadly to embody a, quote, flexible rather than static principle, one that is capable of adaptation to meet the countless and variable schemes devised by those who seek the use of the money of others on the promise of profits. Stop. So I want to decompose that statement. Flexible rather than static principle. Every time Gary Gensler gets up on the Congress stand, he just says, it's in the law, it's in the law. And he will never give specific answers to specific definitions. When the guy asked him about, if I buy a ticket and I want to sell it to somebody, is that a security? And Gary Gensler hemmed and hawed and didn't give an answer. The reason that Gary Gensler refuses to give an answer is this line right here. The idea that the spirit, as he's constantly said, the spirit and intent of the law is to be flexible enough that it's subject to the SEC's interpretation of what will or will not be considered a security in their quest to enforce that law. So when this whole regulatory enforcement framework that people are trying to challenge and get from him, he's basically saying we don't like it, but they gave us the power to make those decisions. And those decisions are kind of iffy. The problem people in the industry have is that if you just have one entity that's judge, jury, and executioner, it's not equitable or fair, which is why everybody's asking for clear regulatory framework around cryptocurrency. The reason that we're not getting it is because the current administration and current Congress do not want to create specific regulatory framework, because to do that, it takes a lot of basically cooperation on both sides. And they're never going to get it. They're never going to get where both sides agree on how we regulate cryptocurrency. That's why they've taken a hands-off approach and just left it up to the SEC to run wild. And ultimately, you have to create case precedent. You have to have the Coinbases of the world, the Krakens of the world, the Robinhoods of the world fighting. Kraken bowing down hurt any sort of opportunity to fix it. You have to have them fight. They've got to fight and fight and fight and build up precedent where the judges, the judicial system says, stop, SEC, stop. You just got washed 8 times for the same thing. Dismiss the case, because once that happens, they have no teeth. They have teeth because if you settle with the SEC, you're basically saying, well, we can't fight it. It is what it is. And so there's no case precedent in order to be able to fight it effectively. We have to create a stronger regulatory framework, not by trying to beg Congress for it, but by beating them. And you beat them by challenging it. Well, this flexible part makes it hard to challenge it, because if they can do that subjectivity, how can you create a case against it? That's why there's an appeal on XRP, which I said was going to, or Ripple. That's what I said was going to happen back when the case was initially dismissed. I said, they're not going to let this go. They'll be right back on it. They're just waiting for the dust to settle, and they're going to be right back at the table. And that's where we are, because that's how they work. Having them write that line, for me, tells me they know exactly what they're doing. They're not just randomly doing it. They know what they're doing. What's scary about that line is it opens the door for shady actors in the SEC to broker backroom deals, aka Enron type stuff, with other people in power in cryptocurrency, which might help explain how the FTX situation was allowed to happen in the first place. We continue with this line, quote, devised by those who seek the use of the money of others on the promise of profits. Stop. So this is what I've been saying before about the big complaint of SEC. The idea that their beef is that somebody is taking money from you and they're using it to do something else with it. That's been their biggest issue. It's not a direct transaction A to B. It's I am using your money to do something to generate profit. Anytime they see that's happening, they're going to consider it a security. Here's where people have a problem with it. With Saitama, this went on for years and the SEC did nothing about it. They didn't take any action until later. They accumulated a significant amount of evidence with this whole case, and it had to be strong in order for them to take plea deals. But it took years for them to even step in and even call out, this is a security, stop what you're doing. There was billions and billions of dollars that flowed into Saitama, and nobody even striking on Dior called it out. How come the SEC isn't flagging this? Like, what the heck's going on here? Same with FTX. When there's big money players, they're willing to look the other way until they sit and they do what they did here, creep into chat rooms, hide under alias names, watch social media. They're gathering information. They're gathering all this stuff to make a case later. That's exactly what happened with Ripple. They sat, marinated on it until it was too late. Remember, Ripple was one of the first ones, and they took so long to get to the point of actually filing the case. But by that point, they had built up copious amounts of information. That's how they work. That's why in Saitama, you didn't hear anything from them, even though allegedly by their own document from day one, it was a security, but they didn't do any enforcement action because they had no evidence. If they needed or thought they needed evidence, I question why they need the flexibility they just said in that line. We continue. In a later section, they provide some very specific definitions of what gave them the determination that Saitama was a security. And I will read these mostly verbatim. I'm going to translate some of it because it gets a bit wordy. First, quote, Saitama purchasers, including those who bought it on crypto asset trading platforms, invested money, specifically US dollars, Bitcoin, or ETH, when they purchased Saitama. Stop. Remember, the SEC themselves has even recently said that Bitcoin is not a currency, that Ethereum is not a currency. In this document, they said money and then included Bitcoin and ETH. It's a contradiction. The contradiction, I would hope, some of these exchanges that are fighting these cases call out the contradiction that's just stated. You can't have it both ways. If Bitcoin is a currency, no problem. That means it cannot be a security. They acknowledge Bitcoin's not a security. If ETH is currency, it cannot be a security. So if you're going to do that, you have to change your definition of what is and isn't a security. I think whoever wrote this didn't understand how subtle wording changes definition and might expose you with your pants down. Because what they probably meant was invested currency, specifically US dollars, or currency equivalent cryptocurrencies, specifically Bitcoin or ETH or USDT or whatever, because it was paired to USDT as well. Then you cover yourself. You're saying one is currency, one is digital, cryptocurrency, to make a distinction between the two, which leaves you open, if you need to declare one a security, but they didn't do that. I saw that and I'm like, okay, so you're saying ETH is money. That's basically what you said. That's literally the words that you said. All right, cool. Second, quote, all Saitama purchasers invested in a common enterprise with each other and with the Saitama project leaders who at all relevant times retained significant Saitama holdings. Stop. Common enterprise. Common enterprise is fluffy. Common enterprise, in the way they're defining it, says that everybody is investing in this one business something, whatever the business something is. Unfortunately, the formation of Saitama LLC made that pretty much an assurance, but Saitama LLC did not exist at the formation of Saitama. So I don't agree that at the point that it started, it was a common enterprise. It was just a token at that point. Once they formed Saitama LLC, and even the team said, Saitama LLC is overseeing the Saitama token, you now have created a common enterprise. Is it possible the formation of the LLC created the very risk that the SEC was able to point at to increase their case about it being a security? If so, it means terrarium should be under the finger as well. I digress. Quote, because the value of Saitama rose or fell together for all holders, all Saitama holders profited or suffered losses equally in amounts proportionate to their Saitama holdings. Stop. This is a very fair, accurate statement. I don't know that it links to a security. The idea that because we're all in it together, because it's all the same token, and because the price fluctuation up and down across the board is proportionately equal, contributes to it being a security. I don't know that I agree with it, but that's the case that they're making here. Quote, as such, their financial fortunes, including the realization of future profits, were inextricably linked to the financial fortunes of each other, as well as those of the Saitama project leaders. Stop. I emphatically disagree with this one. If you have somebody that, let's say somebody has $100 worth of a thing and they sell 50% of what they hold, $50, that is not impacting the financial fortunes of somebody who has $1 million in it. Somebody who has $1 million in it, they sell that same 50%, it's going to impact everybody else negatively. So what I'm saying is you cannot draw the blanket statement that everybody's shift basically impacts everybody else. That's false. It's emphatically false. The only way that would be true is if it was an even distribution of wealth across the board. The reason they're stating it this way, this is where they're drawing a line between token count and money value. Token count, you could argue a case. If I have millions and millions of tokens, that it's going to have an impact on others that have millions and millions of tokens. It still doesn't make any sense because there was a quadrillion in supply at a point. So no matter what, I can easily point at that one and say, well, that's bull. What you just said is bull. If you're using that to justify calling it a security, that's bull on its face because there's no impact. It's only a one-way impact, and that is based on a proportion scale. If you have a lot in there, yes, you could impact the rest of it. How is that fundamentally any different than the stock market? I'll tell you. In the stock market, there are certain imposed limits as to what you can sell, how much you can sell, and in what period of time. And there's cool-off periods and the halting and all these things designed to minimize disruption. The statement they're making is saying, well, it doesn't work like that works, and that helps protect the investors. And because we don't have that protection mechanism, it creates the risk that turns it into a security. That's basically what they're saying. Quote, Pham and other Saitama project leaders offered and sold Saitama to the investing public, both to enrich themselves personally and to collectively fund their efforts to develop the Saitama ecosystem. Yes, that's true. All right, I'm going to get down now to talking about the burns as well as the reflections mechanics. I talked about this in the first coverage. So for Saitama early on, 2% was done as a redistribution as a reflection reward. This is based off what SafeMoon largely arguably originated. The concept that for every transaction, 2% or whatever percent for every project was redistributed to all other holders in proportion to their holdings. But because it was still based off of whatever price, you're basically getting more garbage. So it didn't really benefit you to get the reflections. What we would learn later is that any wallet that had even a dust amount of it would always have supply increased on it, and you could never sell 100% of it, which artificially increased the holder count. Exchanges, central exchanges, look at the holder count as a reason to list the token on their platform. So we knew that it was a tactic in order to increase the holder count artificially and keep it high. You could never completely sell out. All right, quote, then with the burn now, I want to talk about, quote, another 2% of the value of the transaction was burned or destroyed, decreasing the supply of Saitama. They define it as sending those assets to an inaccessible wallet. As I said, that's not the only definition of a burn. There's two other ways to burn it. They did choose sending to the null address as their technique for burning it. And one of the tactics many of these projects will do is they'll immediately burn half the supply to try to incentivize why you should buy it. Hey, it's not really a quadrillion, it's only 500 trillion tokens or whatnot, and it's all really kind of a scam. Third, quote, the Saitama project leaders led Saitama investors to reasonably expect that they would profit from their Saitama investments based on the Saitama project leaders' entrepreneurial and managerial efforts. Through the Saitama website, white paper, social media, and other public outlets, Pham, Individual One, which is Aaron Mansour, and the Saitama defendants held themselves out as the leaders of this project and the driving force behind the creation and future development, et cetera, and so on. Stop. So in a very early episode on the podcast, I gave what the SEC is really looking at in terms of this expectation of profit. They're trying to understand, what is it? Are you saying that there's something that you are doing that is going to essentially guarantee profit on it? If so, we're likely to consider it security. That's what they're saying. Remember, Saitama was baking on the mask. Saitama was baking on the, NFTs and this market space and the education. And they were telling you that these are utilities that we are creating that are going to increase the value of your investment. That's the reason why you should invest in this. That's exactly what they were doing. Same as SafeMoon. And remember what happened to them, to my Caroni and all those jokers. That's exactly what they're saying. They're saying that if there's something that you're doing, if you provide this token and you say, as a result of the actions that we're doing, the value of that's going to go up, we're going to likely consider that security. That's number 3. What they wrote here is validating what I said to be the truth, that people didn't listen to me. They're talking all this stuff about securities they don't understand. It's easy to understand what the SEC is looking for. You can disagree with it, but it's easy to see what they're looking for. They're looking for what are the activities that are happening that they are advertising is going to increase the value of your investment or give you a, quote, promise or guarantee of positive price movement at some point. Now we get to the good stuff. In June and July of 2021, Pham sold approximately $69,500 worth of Saitama to the investing public, as in she sold it. She just dumped it, right? The thing is, as worded, they're making it seem as though she sold it to individual people, that she got people to buy that much Saitama. I don't know if that's the case. I didn't see that, but if that's what they saw on chain, that they actually had people that Pham was able to sell it to directly as opposed to simply selling it on the open market, I don't know. Or are they making the assumption that simply because it was up for sale that somebody bought it? Well, if you sold it on the open market, but there was not somebody else on the other side and it just went back to the liquidity pool, then that means she didn't sell it to an individual. She sold it to the pool. Did she sell it to the pool or did she sell it to individuals? The reason I make that distinction is coming up here next. In early July 2021, Pham and other Saitama project leaders were part of a group that engaged in a series of coordinated Saitama purchases intended specifically to 1. Induce holders of large quantities of Saitama, referred to as whales, to sell their position. 2. Induce members of the investing public to buy Saitama. And 3. Increase the price of Saitama. The Saitama project leaders were particularly concerned that if the existing whales liquidated their Saitama holdings, the price of Saitama would fall, undermining the leaders' efforts to inflate the price and increase the number of Saitama holders. So the Saitama project leaders sought to buy out these whales through coordinated purchases, as Pham put it in a private telescam group chat regarding one such whale. Quote, "We need to lure this idiot to empty his wallet. Doing so would then enable the Saitama project leaders to inflate the price of Saitama without fear of large holders later cashing out and depressing the price." The plan worked. Through their coordinated purchase across numerous wallets in relatively small increments, Pham and other Saitama project leaders successfully induced large Saitama holders to sell their positions while simultaneously attracting new Saitama purchasers. During their approximately 2-day buying spree, the price of Saitama increased by approximately 60%. Stop. And I want to dig more into this, but real quick. So the initial impetus, what they're saying, the initial impetus behind the scam was early whales that bought into the project. If you go back to my coverage, and if you've not listened for a while, I did coverage on Lillian Finance. Lillian Finance, when they were about to launch, they're put up on a pedestal that they were going to be the first project on Cytomask. They were waiting for Cytomask to launch. They were waiting for the failed November 13th Vegas event so that they could start generating their money for what they said that they were going to do. And he's in a different thing that I'll talk about in a different something. That launch didn't happen because Cytomask was a catastrophic failure. As a result, Brad Beatty, who was behind Lillian Finance, said, this was December of that, 2021. We got to go another way. We can't wait any further. I remember him saying, we got kids that need our help. So they spun up on, or going to launch on Uniswap. Leading up to that launch, there was a bunch of hype around Lillian Finance, people that were celebrating them due to the failed November 13th Vegas event of Saitama. When Lillian Finance launched, there was liquidity issues. Brad would state, somebody got access to the contract prior to our launch, and they essentially drained and dumped off of it. And there was large wallets waiting in the wings to dump off the project. What they're saying in the document here for Saitama is that something similar was happening here, that there were large whales early on in the project. Now, here's my question. Vy's the one that launched the contract. Vy's the one that at a point had the owner credential. Vy's the only one who could have made those tokens available to people. If Vy did sell 69,500 to the public, as in she put it out there for sale, and somebody bought up the vast majority of what she put out for sale because she would have had the largest portion of tokens, it's possible that Vy started the whole downfall, because if she put it out there at that price and then later they're doing all this pump and dump activity, wash trading, to spike the price, and it just so happens it gets out of control, and they said, oh crap, I forgot, I sold my tokens to this dude over here and they're sitting on major bags and now they're going to dump out of it. If you also go back to my other coverage I did on Titano, I said that there was a whale, and the whale bought, I want to say it was $16,000 worth of Titano. Titano runs up because there's an unrealistic APY. It runs up, and the guy gets millions and millions, and then they blacklisted the whale because of the same thing. What I'm saying is I saw a pattern here forming in my mind. The strategy, right? The same thing happened with Lillian Finance. The same thing happened with Paratoken. The same thing happened with Titano. The same thing happened with Seifu, Car Salesman's Project. The same thing happened with LockPay. The same thing happened all over the place. And we also know Jared from Subway is all over these projects as well. Ones that get in, and they're just smart enough to get in dirt early, and then they dump off the project. If the success happens, they dump off the project, not understanding the liquidity is not going to be able to tolerate it, because a lot of these projects assume that you're going to chunk out your cells instead of just completely dumping out, because you guys are stupid. So when I saw that, okay, yeah, they were trying to get this whale out of here, you might be wondering to yourself, why did it matter? Wasn't that whale holding the floor? They were afraid of the risk of the whale dumping on the project and killing it. If that whale took out the vast majority of liquidity, that project's not going to go anywhere. It's going to be an immediate pump and dump and die and never recover. What they wanted was a distribution of the wealth. They didn't want centralized wealth in one pocket or one place. Raises the question then, because we do know that V distributed a bunch of tokens to all the leads of the team. Now it got me thinking, is it possible that the whale that they were calling out was Aaron Mansour, who is only identified in the document as individual one and was not charged with the same crime? Things that make you go, But I continue. The remainder is not specific to Pham, so I'm not going to read it verbatim. I'm going to summarize what was going on. This started July of 2021. That's roughly around when I got in, if I recall. 2021, they're all in Telescam now together, and they're trying to figure out, how do we flush this whale out? The best way they can think of, let's generate a lot of volume so we create some FOMO, so we get more. We want more smaller buyers. We want a FOMO run, right? We want a lot of these smaller buyers to eventually entice that whale to sell out, because there's nothing we can do with them until we get them out of here. It's going to harm the price if they dump out of this business. So this is why I suspect, and I don't know for sure, but I suspect that Aaron Mansour might be the person that they're referring to. I don't have evidence of it. It's a theory, but they're trying to flesh this person out. Russ, cult leader, is the one who says, I can create a shill group. I can create artificial traffic, not just bots, but also humans, including himself and other members of the team. And we'll create these artificial buys all over the place. They then, as a larger team, start to create a strategy and say, well, we'll create this shill pump with Shillers and Jake Gain. I'm sorry, that's why I refer to him as a mark, because he was part of their plan. He wasn't named in the case because he didn't know, because he was a mark. He didn't know this was happening to him. But when Saitama starts buddying up with, what's the guy's name? Scott Herman, he was one. Because Scott Herman said, yeah, I got Russ's number. I just call him. And then Jake Again, he was one of them. There was Hinock, he was one of them. What they did, Saitama buddied up with certain of these marks to have them shill the project off the side and entice more people to get in, which increased the holder counts. Under the hood, the team, this is in the case document, so don't call it FUD. It's in the case document. They didn't have to name the influencers because we already knew who they were, because we saw them. They were the ones that were directly and actively promoting the project on a regular, especially Jake. So we already, and Christina is on record saying they approached him to help hype the project. That's her words on the Faltron space. So we know they targeted marks. I'm not saying that they were part of the scam. I'm saying they were marks. They didn't know they were being used to promote the scam. They didn't know that they were being used to make it worse. Their voice hid it. It was a Chewbacca. Their voice was hiding all this shady behavior under the hood because they ran with it. Don't get me started on Hinock. He had no idea this was happening. He didn't know that all that howling and all that crap, he was hiding their shady behavior and he didn't know it because he was a mark. In this group, they all worked together to just create this artificial traffic. They put Russ up front as the face of the brand to take all the bad flack whenever there was a dip, because they wanted to get some dips. They knew they were coming because they wanted the whale to get out, the one whale at least, to get out. There were other whales that got created along the way, and they didn't want excessive whale centralization in the pool of holders. So they knew there was going to be some dump outs as they helped increase the price. It's like, once it gets to a point, they're going to sell. We just got to get it to that point to get them to sell out. Meanwhile, we know people are going to flack on us. Let's put Russ in the front of it. He'll take the beat up. If you remember, every single time, Russ would make some excuse. You know, we're just going to make it, we're just going to launch this puppy. We're just going to do this. We're ready to go. Okay, it's not ready to go. Okay, we got a Certic, whatever. Okay, we got a DDoS, whatever. Okay, we got this over, whatever. And he would never go on a critical platform. All he would do is his quote AMAs where he wouldn't really answer questions, and just, he's fluff. It's all fluff and excuses left, right, and Sunday. That was part of the strategy, because he was just there to take the beatings. He was there to take the verbal beatings from the community as they're trying to get this whale flushed out and say, we're almost there. We just got to get him out of there. So for right now, just take the beating as it is. It's cool. We're increasing our holder counts. We're increasing our telescam chat counts. We're increasing our awareness about the project. Everything's working. Unfortunately, what they didn't bank on is the fact that the whole thing started because they promised they were going to deliver a SideMask wallet. The SideMask wallet did not exist. I'm stressing this to you. Did not exist prior to the failed November 13th Vegas event. The stuff they showed you were essentially mock-ups. They were, this is what we want to end up with. This is where we're going. This is when they engaged that person from Australia to work with Max Equation to try to make it a thing. I want to stress though, when they did the Times Square advertisement for what was going to be SideMask and they said you're going to be able to download it on day one, that was a lie. They might have planned to do that, but it wasn't going to happen. And when I said back then, you knew you didn't have it ready to go and you should have changed the rotator to remove the guarantee that they'd be able to download it, that was your downfall. When Jake again agreed to host the event and do the video, he was the mark. He took the brunt of what happened because most of the people didn't go to the event. The people that went to the event walked away dissatisfied, but the people who didn't go to the event had it even worse because they saw his drunken footage. They saw him begging for drinks. He was the mark, ladies and gentlemen. Saitama set him up to take the fall, just like Russ was there getting beat up, delivering nothing. Because under the hood, they were creating the artificial pumps that were to happen here after the failed November 13th Vegas event. And the thing starts crapping again. Mind you, at this point, we now had some doctors who had FOMO'd in, which was part of the plan, but they didn't expect whales to the degree that the doctors were. This is the story that was told that Dr. Praveen, after the event, went back to the hotel and bought a crap ton more to try to help hold it up. Dr. Praveen didn't know that the whole plan was to flush the whale out, and he didn't understand what the history was because he came in after the fact. He came in way after. He wasn't there from the get. So now, understand, it started to unravel because of why they started the wash trade. They started the wash trade to get rid of a whale because they felt like they had no other way to get the whale out of there. How then does Willie D fall into this? I maintain my theory from the first episode. I believe they wanted Willie D to help some of the FOMO and get the black community involved, but I also think they just wanted his money. As a moderate trader, not a whale trader. They just wanted his money. They wanted his, awareness, just like they were doing with trying to get Hezbollah and Tank Davis and Henry Cejudo. I think they just wanted to have the notoriety at different points to help with their FOMO pump more than anything else. Having him on board as a leader was likely a strategic decision to have somebody in the black community that could resonate that was in a, quote, leadership position. I still say Willie D was another mark, just like the rest of them. He was a mark. He didn't have any authority. He didn't have any power. He couldn't make any decisions, really. He had no real authority. Steve at Rocket Crypto, who was considered part of the dev team, he didn't really have any authority. And then the fallout that happened, we don't know the full specifics. Rodney might, but if you look at the pattern, there was a very strategic approach to what they were trying to do, all to hide the fact that this allegedly whale is down here that they're trying to get rid of. And there's telescam chats that the case calls out where that's what they were trying to do. So I say allegedly because I didn't see it, but the case calls out, no, we were trying to get this whale out of here. We got to get him out of here. V's on record saying that's what we needed to do. Did they really need to do that though? I don't know, because I don't know what would have happened if they left the whale alone or negotiated with the whale, or better suited, do a relaunch. Because one thing that was chatted about, this is prior to the failed November 13th Vegas event, is if we knew that there's too much supply, the quadrillion supply was the thing at the time. Multiple people called out the supply seems a little bit too high for long-term success. I was one of them. So a relaunch might have actually helped them in that regard, where they could clean it up and drill down the supply. They didn't get smart about the relaunch until after SideMask was launched in a buggy state. So I think they were just reacting to whatever it is. Until we really know, though, who the whale was, we can't understand the motivation. Is it something about the person? Again, was it Aaron Mansour? Was it one of the other people? Or was it just V not knowing what she was doing? That's what we don't know, but it was still intriguing. And I'm going to wrap up with a couple more points here. February 2024. So now a bit of time has passed. Vy Pham is still involved on the Saitama side. They're talking about Robo Inu, but it connects back over to Saitama's side because she then reconnects with, in this case, Max Equation, who's Max Hernandez, and Individual 2, who's the person out of Australia who's not named, and I cannot confirm who this is. But allegedly, what they're doing, and I say allegedly even though they have snippets of the telescam in this, but they create a telescam chat with this person and Max, and she's asking now about solving some of the issues with volume trades for Robo Inu and some suggestions, and then just connecting with their old buddies, on the Scam Thomas side. But essentially, Max Equation said, quote, "We definitely know this from the Saitama days, as without volume, there is no hype, movement, or FOMO, so to speak." Individual 2 agreed with that and said, quote, "A project without volume will die day by day. New investors will only look at volume to decide whether to invest or not." And allegedly, Individual 2 was the one who said, create a bot to pump the price and create nice charts and fake it and do this. Pham, who again was the one who started this whole business, says, yes, that's what we want to do. Let's create a plan together to make this work. And again, to save Robo, but she's contacting the Saitama people in order to help make it happen. Now we start to ask the question, during the time that SaitaMask was just failing and failing and failing and it wasn't working out, and no matter what they did, Russ would go up there and make excuses. If it's true, now this is February 2024, so we're long after SaitaMask was finally rolled out. But my point is, we don't know that Max Equation was really doing any code. We heard from Steve Rocket Crypto that somebody else, likely this Individual 2, is the one that owned the code for SaitaMask. Later, there's going to be a Saita Pro. I sent a video where I showed India Dani Bulls, DHANI Bulls.com, as a site address that showed for what was going to be Saita Pro, that allegedly they outsourced the development to a new team to build Saita Pro as a replacement to SaitaMask, and then they shut off SaitaMask. I have all that in my history in the Saitama Saga playlist, where they had moved to a new development team allegedly out of India. I can't prove that it was India. Some people said it was the Philippines, but it clearly said IndiaDaniBulls.com as a site address, which didn't make any damn sense. But the point is, after Max Equation leads the team, now we hear Max Equation's back in the mix, working with V again. So 2 of the people that were on the Saitama side are at a telescam chat talking about the strategy used on Saitama in order to pump the Robo token. V is in all sorts of trouble on the Robo Inu side because of all the efforts to pump it. And remember what I said, that Robo Inu never had the level of velocity that Saitama did. Nowhere close. It didn't pump anywhere near like what Saitama did. The people on GotBit, there's back and forth with V talking about how some of the chosen pumps, artificial volume, didn't make any sense. It wasn't clean charts and would create flags on sites like CoinMarketCap. There's a rule in CoinMarketCap that if they see that the volume is abnormal, and they don't define abnormal, but if it's abnormal, if it's unusual, if it doesn't make any sense, they hold the right to basically suppress it, whatever exchange is triggering it. So if you're triggering a whole bunch of stuff on, let's say, LBank, CoinMarketCap can suppress LBank's traffic from the graph in order to normalize it because they can see that it's abnormal. The market makers, these automated market makers, AKA bots, know that. And so they sell different tiers of artificial volume to try to beat this transaction. They want to show steady growth. If you've heard me for a while, I've said it's not normal for a graph to just go up and up and up and up and up with never going down. And it's just a crazy amount up. It shows there's some form of manipulation going on. You don't know what it is. But you should never have just significant climb without any sort of crap because it's going to crash out. This is what killed LockPay with Car Salesman 2.0 and SafeJet with Car Salesman 3.0. So now that she's working back with the same people, trying to repeat what happened on Saitama, the SEC connected the dots. They said, all right, you did it over here, you're doing it again over here, and you're involving these people from Saitama in it in both situations. And the people from Saitama are the ones, they're doing the work. Max Hernandez is the one who's promoting doing this pump and dump. Individual 2 is promoting doing this pump and dump. Russ is up there telling people to pump and all this. Manny the Hitman is telling people to pump and all this. Individual 1, which is Aaron Mansour, is telling people to pump. Everybody's saying pump. You're in a secret channel where nobody sees what you're doing and nobody knows that you're doing that. Nobody knows why you're doing this. Meanwhile, you're holding bags of the token. This all wraps up in one very subtle way. And I thought this was interesting because of the failed November 13th event and the significant drop that we saw fresh off that one, as well as what was happening with the Dr. Ravine, which I'm not even going to talk about the terrarium intercept as part of this. V, as I said, V was part of the process all the way up through July-ish, August-ish, somewhere around that time frame before she eventually moved on. This contradicts what we were told way back yonder, which was that she had left the project, or the unknown founder had left the project, like literally just created the code and then transferred it over. She might have transferred the owner address, but she was not out of the project at that point. She still was in the project to a limited degree all the way up to roughly the end of July-ish. She still was involved in the project. Well, I believe, I don't know if it was Faltron or somebody else, but somebody had done some analysis and they had found that there was a lot of centralization in the large holders of Saitama back when it was, June, July-ish timeframe, and to a lesser degree, August. And people speculated that was Russ. Russ adamantly denied having a significant bag. We would learn later, he certainly did have a significant bag, and he used some of that money because he had sold. He used some of that money. He had helped out Suzuki Inu. He had been pushing money back to Hosh Finance. We learned about Mathematic. We learned about all these other projects that Russ was connected to with some of this money. Russ, to this day, had denied ever having any of this involvement, even though we saw there was a direct connection from a Saitama-based wallet. This is why I said I'm not going to be able to settle on 2 parts, ladies and gentlemen, because it's a rabbit hole. I have to dig deeper. And unfortunately, I'm not going to be doing this. I'm not doing this as a full time. I refuse. I'm doing this as a weekend special. So there has to be some anticipation. There has to be something that brings you back. Hopefully it's been intriguing so far. You can read all this yourself. It's all out there. I am going to be doing Parte 3 next Saturday. I'm not doing a daily. I refuse. I got other stuff to do, man. But I guarantee you I will do Parte 3 on next Saturday. And on Parte 3, I'm going to be focusing on the cult leader, because the cult leader is now I have to do a handoff from V to the cult leader to try to figure some of this out. Although Max Equation's got a strong part in this. I want to figure that out. I also want to try to identify the Australia person. If you might know who the Australia person could be, please do share it on comments or at cryptotalk.fm in our contact form, because I am curious myself of who this mystery person is that allegedly was behind these pumps, that was working with Max Equation to help support these pumps just prior to the failed November 13th Vegas event. Meanwhile, in the meantime and in between time, I'm wrapping this up, and I will be back next Saturday for more of this bullshit.